Okay, thank you so much for coming. I
My pleasure.
wanted to ask you, how do you think the lesson went?
I think that on a whole it went fairly well, but I think there could be some improvements made.
Oh, that's really reflective of you. Reflective. How do you set up the procedures to ensure that the students are consistently on task and actively learning?
Well, in this lab, they had to, while I was performing the experiments, they had to be taking notes. They had to be writing down what we were using. They had to be writing a description of those. So if they didn't focus on that, then they weren't able to accomplish the task at hand. And if they got I tried to watch them, but most of them in this class, they're an advanced class, and so most of them were pretty good about staying on task.
I say that because there were no disruption whatsoever. They were actively following what you were doing. They were listening carefully. Another question I want to ask you: how do you ensure that students understand the vocabulary they need to successfully master the objectives?
Most of the vocabulary that they used, we had already gone over. Before we did this lab, we had gone through different, some of it was lectures, some of it was online activities, some of it was their introduction to the vocabulary through STEM scopes. They're able to get in and do the vocabulary. We practice using it. So by the time we did this activity, the vocabulary should have been familiar to them. We had talked about reactants, we had talked about products, and I had quizzed them on it. And I don't remember in the lesson if I did anything quiz-wise on it, but I generally in class ask my students, okay, so what did we call this on this side? What were these that we did? What happened over here? So I try to use the vocabulary and have them tell me what it means in the lesson.
And I asked this question because I noticed that you talked about two very important terms, the exothermic and the endothermic.
Yes.
And you told them what they meant instead of building on their prior knowledge, for them to come up with that.
Actually, those two terms came off of the video, and we hadn't discussed those two terms before. And so that's why I believe I had the students write them down on the bottom of their paper so that they could remember them. And then I expected them to use them when they did their lab write-ups, so that they would get the practice using those two words.
And another one was that precipitate. You asked, what's a precipitate? And you asked them to raise their hand, and there was a little bit of pause there.
Right, they weren't as familiar with that word. This was something new that they hadn't really discussed before.
And so that's the point that I would like for us to work on.
Okay.
Say. And one thing that I was thinking, whenever I'm planning my lessons, if there's going to be like a word that I don't know, I go back to the roots. And so I liked manipulatives because that's how I learn. And so, like the exothermic, whenever I was watching you, I was like, exothermic, that sounds like The Exorcist. And so how can they build, to actually grasp what they mean? So you could say, exothermic, do you guys know what that means? And then perhaps break it down. So exo, I thought about the word exorcist because I think most of the kids have watched the movie, that it was coming out.
Right.
And so that means out. And then, the word thermic, therm means heat.
Yes, and we have discussed the word thermic, and so that's a natural, they should understand what thermic, and most of them do understand the thermic part of it.
And then the same thing, so once they know the thermic, then going back to the endo, that if exo means out, the endo. And you did tie it up to, you said about the egg, how the egg, it has to get it needs the heat, it holds the heat.
Right.
And what was the other one? I don't remember.
The egg, to take the energy.
And then and then exo was the candle.
Yes.
Right.
And we did do a lab, the students did a lab after you left that they actually did where they put two things together in a plastic sandwich bag, and they experienced the endothermic, it turned cold. And another one they did, I can't remember which lab it was, but one of them did turn hot. So they got to experience it. So hopefully in that way they were able to connect it, but they Yeah, it's easy to confuse exo and endocell. Which one is which one is which? So probably more practice with that would be good.
And also with the precipitate. And I was like, precipitate, I've heard it too. And a lot of times to me, I have to play dumb, for my kids. I'm like, that sounds like precipitation. And then they would have that it was the product coming out. So basically breaking it down so they come up with the idea and then they connect it to
Yeah, that's a good idea.
a stick, someone like, oh, okay, I do know this word. So anyways, thank you so much for allowing me to observe you.
It was a pleasure to have you.
And I hope that this feedback has helped you.
Yes, it is. It's a good method to teach the vocabulary, which in science there is a lot of vocabulary.
And then, and if you also want to refresh on the Greek words and Latin roots, prefixes, suffixes, they're going to make connection.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Thank you. Thank you for your input.
Thank you.